Chapter 2741. Giselle looked at James. Isn't your acting really good? Do your best to hide it then. That's not up to me. Look at how you're treating me. Is this something a normal couple would go through? I think you're the one who will get us caught. Giselle paused for a moment. All right, I'll take note. James looked at her. Will you do whatever I tell you to? Don't worry, I'll play along. Giselle treated it as a job. She did it well and did her best. James looked at her while deep in thought. When it came to acting, she was more professional about it, but she wasn't into the character. She only followed the rules, but all the actresses he had worked with were better than her. But it was fine because it would just be for a few years. It was better if she wasn't into the character because if she developed feelings, it would be tough to get rid of her later on. At 9:30 p.m., Giselle drove James back to the hotel near his filming location. James unbuckled the seatbelt and looked at her. Hey, do you want? Giselle frowned. What? He looked at her serious expression and then suddenly burst out laughing. I wanted to ask if you want me to pay for the ride. Why are you nervous? Do you think I need the money? You don't, but I'll feel bad if I don't pay. I'm leaving the money here. It's up to you if you want to take it. James smiled, left the money, and got out. Giselle looked down at the money, then picked it up. James tell you. Unfortunately, he was already in the hotel. It was a quarter. She chuckled. He did that intentionally. However, not too far away, the paparazzi managed to get pictures of James and the woman in the car. The next day, #James tells relationship exposed. The news quickly spread, and when all the actors and crew members saw that he was trending, they started gossiping. James is in a relationship. I heard a crew member say that they saw a young girl coming to meet him. It looks exactly like this woman. So, Tell was in a secret relationship. James just finished filming the first scene of the day. When he was stretching, he heard someone mention his name, so he asked his assistant, "What are you talking about?" The assistant looked at him and hesitated. James frowned. He knew that something was up based on his assistant's expression. "Tell me," the assistant quietly said, "your trending Miss Peterson was caught driving you home by the paparazzi." James immediately took out his phone. His WhatsApp and Twitter were flooded with messages. He quickly went to the trending page to read. The assistant sighed. "If the fans find out that you're just pretending to date Miss Peterson and that you have an agreement, if you're lucky, your image will be ruined, but if you're not, someone will think that you're being paid to date a rich woman. Think before you speak." James glared at the assistant. He then stuffed his phone back into his pocket. "Do I need her money?" The assistant snapped back. "Everyone knows that your dad is the one with the money. Why else are you acting?" James had no retort. The assistant quietly said, "It's not easy for a rich man's kid to come as far as you have." James smirked. "I'm going to beat you up if you keep talking." At that moment, the netizens managed to find a lot of information about Giselle. She was a Peterson from Houston City. She studied overseas and returned, and she was a career-driven woman running her family business. Her family was as wealthy as James's. Chapter 2742. Everyone online sent their well wishes, but James's fans were doing things differently. Not only did they tease that their idol wasn't the brightest tool in the shed, so having a career-driven girlfriend would be tough on him, but they also claimed he would probably be the submissive one. #honestly, I kinda want to see him getting whipped by his wife. Is he being paid to date the woman? I heard that the Petersons are very rich. He's punching up. A few days after the news got out, neither James nor Giselle responded and seemed to have quietly admitted to it. Many reporters trying to ride the wave went to the Houston resort to try and get an interview with Giselle, but she never accepted the request of any of them. Some unethical reporters brought up the rumor that Giselle had tried to break Colton and Freya apart in the past. That sparked a discussion online, and someone close to the source said that Giselle had chosen black gold for her internship because of Colton. Giselle sat in her office and read the comments attacking her online with a cold expression. Her secretary stood next to her. "Miss Peterson, should I send someone to keep things under control? There's no need to care what they say online." She placed her tablet down. Let them have their fun. The secretary hesitated but didn't say what was on her mind. After she left the office, she bumped into Gordon and was stunned. "Am I Mr. Peterson?" He nodded, then went into the office. Giselle slowly got up. "Dad, I saw the news." Gordon sat down on the couch and smiled. "I came to remind you to ignore the comments online. James is handling this." Giselle was surprised and looked suspicious. "What did he do?" "He admitted that you're dating and that crushed the rumors. He cleared everything up, so you don't need to worry." He admitted to it. Giselle couldn't believe it. Gordon poured himself a cup of tea and frowned when he saw how agitated she was. "Isn't that a good thing? He's a responsible person, Giselle. He's a great kid. You should cherish him." Giselle rubbed her nose bridge. In the agreement, they were not to make their relationship public so that no one would know, even if they broke up. It wouldn't affect his career or his future. Why did he make it public? The next day, at the Kong ports. After James wrapped up his scenes, he went to get his bags with his assistant from the hotel after saying goodbye to the crew. The assistant heard the doorbell. "Who is it?" He walked over to open the door and saw Giselle standing there. He was surprised. "Miss Peterson." Giselle walked into the room, and James, packing his bags, looked up. "Yes. Who said you could make it public?" James smiled because her tone sounded like she was coming to give him grief. He stood up straight. "I helped you distract the media, and not only did you not thank me, but you're also trying to take revenge." Giselle walked over. "The agreement says." "I know." James slowly pulled down his sleeves. "Even if I didn't make it public, the paparazzi still caught us. We should just make it realistic. Actors always try to do that." Giselle was rendered speechless. "Oh right, you're not an actress." James crossed his arms and continued. "So, I need to teach you how to act like an actor's girlfriend." Chapter 2743. Giselle snapped back and chuckled. "You think you need to teach me that?" "No. So, shouldn't you be more self-aware if you're acting as my girlfriend?" "What do you mean?" "For example." James suddenly approached, which made Giselle back away. He smiled. "Help me pack my bags." Giselle had nothing to say. James squatted next to the luggage and continued packing. "Why are you still standing there? Shouldn't the girlfriend help?" She was utterly speechless. After his bags were packed, Giselle helped him with one of the bags. She handed it to the assistant when she saw that he was there. "Hold this." The assistant paused and looked toward James, who was walking over. James squinted. "Miss Peterson, do you think my bags are too heavy for you? We'll walk out together. Aren't you afraid? The media already knows that we're in a relationship. There's no point hiding, so why not just be open about it?" James then walked out with his assistant. Giselle didn't say anything. After the three of them walked out of the hotel, they encountered a group of reporters, as expected. When James made their relationship public, it shocked the world. Now that they were seen leaving the hotel together, it cemented their status. James greeted the reporters. He walked to the car and handed his bags to his assistant before turning to look at Giselle, who was walking over. Giselle smiled and got into the car. The reporters all came over. "Mr. Tell, when did you start dating Miss Peterson? How long have you been together?" "Miss Peterson, there's a rumor online that you were in love with Mr. Goldman from Bassburg and even tried to ruin his relationship. Are you sincerely dating Mr. Tell?" The reporter's sharp question made Giselle's face drop. James caught the change in her emotion and looked toward the reporter. "That's rude. Isn't Mr. Goldman in a very loving relationship with his wife? I had feelings for Mrs. Goldman at one point too. Is that considered trying to break them apart too?" Giselle looked at him in shock. Even his assistant couldn't believe what had just happened. This man really would say anything. James confessed to having feelings for Freya, and all the reporters were stunned. Giselle was silent the entire way back. She looked at James sitting next to her and wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. The assistant who was driving kept nagging at him. "You really will say anything? Aren't you afraid that the media will blow up this matter? It would be fine if it just blew up. If the Goldmans found out, it would be terrible." James crossed his arms and leaned back into the seat. "It's all in the past, so there's nothing to worry about. The assistant grimaced. Giselle's eyes darted around, and after a long pause, she said, "There's really no need to intentionally explain yourself to the reporters." She knew that James had brought that up to help her. "I wasn't doing it intentionally. I'm just telling the truth." James waved his hand. "There's no need to thank me. That's what a boyfriend would do." Giselle smiled sweetly. "You really are a great actor." "Hey, did you really have feelings for Coleman?" asked James. She paused, then looked out the window. "Isn't it normal for women to choose a partner who is a good match?" Chapter 2744. James squinted. "The men that you choose are the ones you think are outstanding." Giselle didn't reply. He clicked his tongue and shook his head. "It's not wrong, but more importantly, you should choose someone who loves you. If he doesn't, he won't be yours, no matter how outstanding he is. Do you see relationships as a commodity?" Giselle took a deep breath and turned to look at him. "Are you lecturing me? I'm just being honest. You're too self-centered and always do things your way. You like to be in control of everything. I realized this when we signed the contract. You don't like blind dates but didn't want to reject them, so you wanted my help in this and set the rules. I have to pretend to be the perfect boyfriend to meet your parents. You don't try to pretend that you are my girlfriend, though. People might think you're pretending to be my boss." Giselle was annoyed. What? Am I wrong? You're the one who set all the rules in the agreement. Do you think I'm easy to manipulate? I don't like being told what to do. Now that our relationship is made public, my dad will definitely want to see you. If you think you won't be able to be a good girlfriend, you should find someone else to do this with you." James said all that because he was annoyed by the online comments. They were saying that Giselle had him wrapped around his finger. No way. He wasn't going to be the one who was manipulated. Giselle ordered him around with the agreement, but couldn't he play this out the way he wanted to? She was the one who approached him, so he shouldn't be the one who got the short straw. Giselle was quiet for a long moment, then bit her lip. "What do you want me to do? I'm going to make this clear. My dad isn't someone you can easily trick. If you meet him, you have to do as I say." At Bassburg, as the Seaview Villa, the news that James admitted to having feelings for Freya in the past got to Colton. He closed the video, got up, and went upstairs. Freya was sleeping with their daughter in the room. She didn't watch the news whenever she had the chance to spend time with her daughter. She stirred when she felt someone hugging and kissing her. She opened her eyes and looked at him curiously. "What are you doing?" Meanwhile, at the Tell Manor, Giselle followed James to his family home to meet his father. Jefferson only believed they were together when he saw his son making their relationship public. He was overjoyed when his future daughter-in-law showed up, so he prepared a gift. Giselle was surprised. "There's no need to spend any money." "Oh, that's nothing." He handed her the gift. "We're going to be family soon, so don't worry. After getting married to this kid, I'll teach him a lesson if he mistreats you." James took a seat on the couch and called for edamame. When the dog came over, he gave it a good rub. "What if your daughter-in-law mistreats me?" Jefferson frowned. "Do you have no pride?" James patted edamame's head. "Your dad asked if you have pride." Jefferson had nothing to say to that. Giselle looked at the Samoyed next to him. It looked like a white snowball because its hair was too fluffy. The fur looked very pretty. Jefferson saw that she was looking at edamame and was worried that she was afraid of dogs, so he smiled and explained, "That's edamame, James's dog. It's very friendly and doesn't bite. Don't worry." Chapter 2745. Giselle asked, "Can I pet it?" Jefferson nodded. "Of course you can. Edamame, come here." When it heard his voice, edamame jumped off the couch and walked over to him. He started rubbing its head. Giselle stretched out her hand, and edamame started sniffing it and accepted her petting. The moment it was touched, edamame stuck out its tongue and closed its eyes in enjoyment. Jefferson said, "Isn't this a good baby?" Giselle smiled. "Yes." James cleared his throat and called edamame back to him, but it only turned its head to face him and didn't move. James frowned. "Are you a bad dog now? Come." Edamame lowered its head and looked sad. Jefferson glared at James, then asked, Giselle, if you haven't had dinner, stay and dine with us. Giselle paused, retracted her hand, and stood up. Quote. She's your daughter-in-law, so she'll naturally stay for dinner, right? James looked at her. She forced a smile. I definitely will now that you've asked. Jefferson was delighted and immediately asked the helpers to prepare dinner. After he walked over to the kitchen, Giselle looked at James, who was shaking his leg while leaning back. In the chair he looked proud. You're at my home, so you need to do as I say. When it was time for dinner, Jefferson hosted her warmly. She ate as much as possible because she didn't want to disappoint him. Unexpectedly, James suddenly took a big fat piece of meat, placed it on her plate, and smiled. Have some more. Look at how skinny you are. It won't be great for bearing children. Giselle clutched her cutlery because she hated fatty meat. He did that intentionally. Jefferson looked at his son with an annoyed expression. Giselle took a big chunk of mashed potatoes and stuffed it into her mouth with the meat. James looked at her and smiled. Do you like it? Giselle pretended to like it. It's quite good. Jefferson suddenly said, Giselle, James hates peas. James didn't know why he did that. Upon hearing that, Giselle immediately scooped up some peas and dropped them on his plate. Since he made it hard on her, she would return the favor, have some peas. They're good for you. James scoffed, but when he saw Jefferson glaring at him, he had to eat the peas. You're the best dad in the world. Jefferson chortled. I guess you're giving up on your little gold mine, huh? James immediately stopped speaking. After dinner, Jefferson asked Giselle to stay and said that she could sleep in James's room. Giselle paused, and before she could speak, James objected. You want her to sleep in my room. What about me? You can sleep anywhere you want. Jefferson looked hostile. Did Dad notice something? Make sure you don't do anything to someone's beloved daughter. James was stunned. Did Jefferson notice something? Giselle smiled. Thank you, Mr. Tell. He smiled back. There's no need to be shy. Don't worry. The rascal won't do anything rude as long as I'm here. James was rendered speechless. The helper brought Giselle to James's room. It was clean and simple with a gray and white color scheme. There wasn't a hint of bright colors, and it looked pleasant. Giselle placed her bag on the desk and looked at the items on the shelves. There were some magazines and books, awards, and pictures. There was also a poster of him on top of the bed. Chapter 2746. James pushed the door open. When he saw her holding the photo album in her hand, he hastily went up to stop her. No, you can't look at that. Giselle narrowed her eyes when she saw how nervous he was. What's the matter? Are there any other unseemly photos in this album? It's none of your business. My father told you to sleep in my room, but that doesn't mean you can simply touch the things here. Really, what are you gonna do about it if I insist on looking at it then? James grabbed her wrist when she tried to snatch the photo album out of his hand. Why do you have to look at my photo album? Could it be that you have a crush on me? Giselle was rendered speechless. After a short while, James released her wrist and took a step back. He held tightly to the photo album and said, You can touch whatever you want in this room, but I won't let you lay a single finger on this photo album. Just when he turned around, his father came into his room and said matter-of-factly, It's just a photo album. I have a lot more of them in my room. Come with me, Giselle. I'll show them to you. James froze. Dad. Giselle followed Jefferson to his study with a grin on her face. He handed the collection of photo albums to her when James appeared in front of the door. No. He tried to stop Giselle from opening the photo album, but it was too late. Giselle had already opened up the photo album. When she saw the photo, she was stunned for a moment before breaking into a laugh. Only then did she understand why he refused to let her see his photos when he was a kid. There was this one particular photo where he cried very hard while someone was shaving his hair. James froze. He took a deep breath and just wanted to kill himself right away. How could his father let other people see these untoward photos? Giselle couldn't help herself and chuckled out loud. Jefferson laughed as well. Look at him. He looks just like an ugly monkey. Sometimes his mother and I are wondering if he's our kid or not. Giselle turned her head around to glance at James. Well, Most of the kids look like ugly monkeys when they are born. But you're right. He's indeed pretty ugly. All of us are like that when we are born. I'm sure you were this ugly as well, retorted James. He was so angry that he wanted to pass out right now. No way. Since she has seen my photos, I must ask Mr. Peterson for her photos as well. I can't be the only one who got exposed like this. At night, when Giselle came out of the bathroom and saw James lying on the bed, she was stunned. What are you doing here? Without raising his head, James replied, why must I give my own room to you? I don't care what my father said. I'm not going to give my room to you. Please go and find whatever place you want to sleep. Giselle squinted and looked at him. After a short while, she walked over to the bed and lay down as well, startling James. He looked at her in surprise and asked, what are you doing? Didn't you say I can find whatever place I want to sleep? I'm going to sleep on this bed then. He closed the magazine and grabbed the blanket. Won't you feel embarrassed? Why should I? Asked Giselle. Initially, James thought Giselle would not sleep with him if he refused to leave his bed, but it seemed like he was wrong. Good night. I'm going to sleep now, Giselle said and turned around. Looking at her back, James was so exasperated that the veins on his forehead bulged. Since she did not care about it, he figured that he shouldn't care about it either. He lay down and turned around. Both of them slept with their backs facing each other, and there was so much space between them that it could fit one more person in it. Toward the middle of the night, Giselle woke up feeling hot and suffocated. She opened her eyes and saw the reason for her suffocation. There was an arm on top of her body. She turned her head around to look at James and was speechless about his sleeping posture. As Giselle was about to move his arm away, he refused to let her go and wrapped his arm tighter around her, causing her to freeze in her position. She lay stiffly on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. His breath brushed the nape of her neck. It was tickling, and a strange feeling was tugging at her heart. Chapter 2747. James. Giselle called out to James. When he did not respond, she pushed him in an attempt to wake him up but to no avail. He was sleeping like a rock. Great. Now I can't sleep. That was the first thought that surfaced in her head. Since she could not wake James up, she had no other choice but to stay awake until morning. When the day broke, the light dispersed the room's darkness. James opened his eyes and was struck dumb when he saw the face in front of him. He squinted, and his heart skipped a beat. Slowly, ever slowly, he moved his arm away without waking up Giselle. Are you aware that your sleeping position is bad? Giselle had already woken up and was staring at him. James sprang up. He sat at the side of the bed and placed his hand on his forehead. You can't blame me. I've gotten used to sleeping alone. Giselle got up as well. Since she had been keeping the same posture the whole night, her arm was sore. She stole a glance at James and said, I'm going to wash up. After Giselle got into the bathroom, he threw himself on the bed. He couldn't believe that she was so calm in such a situation and started to suspect whether she was a woman or not. Meanwhile, inside the bathroom, Giselle stood with her arms propped on top of the wash basin and stared at her flustered look in the mirror. He didn't see it, did he? She asked herself. In the blink of an eye, Cameron was due to give birth. She was having periodic contraction pains after being admitted to the hospital for 2 days. Waylon, Freya, and Maisie were keeping her company in the hospital. Even Sunny and Mahina rushed over from the East Islands to Bassburg when they heard that she was about to give birth to her baby. The pain lasted for about 10 hours before she was pushed into the delivery room in the late afternoon. The rest of the people were not allowed to enter the delivery room. Waylon clenched his fists tightly, and it was only now that he understood Nalace's anxiety when Daisy was giving birth. Sunny looked at the delivery room worriedly. Nick had arrived at the hospital as well. When he saw everyone was standing outside the delivery room, he frowned. After that, he walked up to Sunny and comforted him. Cam will be fine. Sunny nodded. Time was ticking away. Waylon kept looking at his watch from time to time. He was so anxious that he couldn't sit still and paced back and forth in front of the delivery room. Maisie and Freya were sitting on the chairs with Nolan and Colton around them, content. Sonny closed his eyes and prayed. It had been more than 3 hours, but Cameron still hadn't come out. Suddenly, the light above the delivery room turned green, and Mahina's eyes glowed up. A smile appeared on her face as she said, "She's out." Everyone turned their heads and looked at the nurse that came out of the delivery room. 2 swaddled babies were in her arms, and when she saw the group of people, she was stunned. It took her a few moments to come around her senses. "Congratulations, Miss Goldman has given birth to twins. Both of them are baby boys." Waylon did not look at his sons and rushed into the delivery room. Cameron was lying weakly on the bed in the delivery room, and her face was pale. "Cam." When she heard Waylon's voice and felt the warmth of his hand, she slowly opened her eyes and said in a raspy voice, "Wayne." Waylon landed a kiss on her forehead and said, his voice hoarse, "Get some rest. I'll stay by your side." As if she was hypnotized by him, she drifted off to sleep once she relaxed. After that, Cameron was sent to the VIP care unit. Waylon had been staying beside her until she woke up. Holding her hand, Waylon asked, "How do you feel now, Cam?" Cameron smiled and replied, "I'm feeling fine now. How are the babies?" He kissed the back of her hand and said, "Don't worry. They're fine too. Cam, you're finally awake." When Cameron saw her father and Mahina, she was stunned. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? I'm worried about you, of course. But luckily, both you and your kids are safe," Sonny said as he heaved out a sigh of relief. Chapter 2748. Mahina chimed in and said, "That's right, miss. All of us had been waiting for you outside." Cameron looked toward Waylon. He raised his hand to collect her hair behind her ears and said, "You've done a great job, Cam." When Daisy and Nales heard that Cameron had given birth to twins, they called Waylon and congratulated them. After they hung up the call, Waylon brought Cameron to see their sons in the nursery room. Cameron leaned on the window and looked at the 2 babies. She couldn't help but laugh. "They look so small. I'm sure they'll look like you when they grow up. If they looked like Waylon, they would be very handsome." Waylon chuckled and wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "Do you want to go back and get some rest?" "No, I want to look at them." "All right then." After they had had enough of looking at their babies, both of them returned to her ward. Then, they saw Colton and Freya in the ward with a lot of nutritious products in their hands. "Did you guys go to see the babies?" Waylon nodded. Cam wanted to see them. Freya placed something on the table and said, "Cam, I'll leave this here. Don't forget to eat it, as it can help you to replenish your energy." "Thank you so much," said Cameron. Colton grabbed Freya's shoulder and said, "Wayne, please take care of Cam. We'll go back first." Waylon smiled. "Don't worry, I will." He helped Cameron get back to the bed and tucked her in. "Are you hungry? Do you want to eat something?" Cameron said, "I want steaks, beer, fried chicken, and..." "Other than these." Waylon frowned. She lay back down in disappointment and said, "Why can't I eat when I've already delivered the babies?" Waylon let out a helpless laugh. He raised his hand to pet her head and said, "All right, be a good girl. You can eat all you want after you're discharged from the hospital. What you need to do right now is take a good rest." Cameron wrapped her arms around Waylon's neck and said, "Then make sure you make it up for me after I've recovered." Chuckling, Waylon replied, "Sure." A week later, Cameron was discharged from the hospital. Sonny stayed in Emperin to help his daughter take care of her kids. With Sonny's help, Waylon was able to spend most of his time taking care of Cameron. Colton and Freya would come to their house often to visit Chip and Dale. "Chip and Dale, huh? What cute nicknames," Freya commented as she held Chip in her arms. Chip was sucking on his pacifier as he looked back at her with his big eyes. "They're easier to remember too," Cameron said as she took a bite of the apple. "Their father will give them a name anyway. Also, they'll be Charm's cousins from now onward. I'm sure she'll be very happy when she sees them." Freya laughed. Suddenly, Dale began to cry. Both of them looked over the source of the sound and saw Colton coming in with Dale in his arms. "I don't know why, but this little guy cries when I hug him." Freya placed Chip back into the crib and walked toward Colton. She took Dale over from him and said, "It's because you don't know how to hug him. Come, Let me show you. She took Dale over, and soon, he stopped crying after she comforted him. For babies below 3 months, you need to hug them horizontally by using one hand to hold their heads and necks while using the other to support their hips. This is because they're still small and fragile. If you hold them in the wrong position, it might impede their growth. Colton scratched his head. Really? His daughter had grown up, so he was used to holding her vertically. Cameron was learning while listening to Freya. Suddenly, Freya turned her head around. Cam, don't tell me that you don't know about this either. Cameron smiled awkwardly and said, actually, it's Wayne and my father who have been holding these kids after I was discharged from the hospital. I've never held them before. Chapter 2749. It was not that she did not want to hold her child. It was just that her father and Waylon did not let her hug them. Her father was worried that she might accidentally injure the babies. Freya chuckled, well, I can understand your father. But anyway, you shouldn't pick up your babies that often during the first 3 months. Other than feeding them milk or when they're asking for a hug, just let them stay in their crib and sleep. Cameron blinked. It seems like you know a lot. As expected of someone who has already become a mother. Colton and Freya stayed for a while before they left. Cameron squatted beside the crib and observed her 2 kids. She poked their cheeks with her finger gently. Oh my gosh, they're so soft and adorable. They're just like dolls, she thought. Why didn't you put on your shoes? Waylon's voice erupted behind her. She turned her head around and said, I just came here to take a look at our babies. Waylon walked over with her home slippers in his hand and put them beside her. You need to put them on. You haven't fully recovered yet. Cameron put on the slippers and sighed. Do you know how hard it is for me not to wash my head and use the air conditioner in such hot weather? She threw herself into Waylon's arms and complained. Waylon chuckled and patted her head. Well, you just need to hang on for a month. Where is my dad? Asked Cameron. Your father went to the market. He said he's going to cook something for you to help you recover faster. Cameron's face sank. What? Not again. Her father had been cooking a lot of food for her for the past week. If you don't eat the food, our babies won't have anything to eat. They can't drink powdered milk every day, said Waylon. Why did you know everything? Mumbled Cameron. Of course, I know everything. He carried her up from the floor and placed her on the bed. I have to do some homework if I want to be a qualified father, right? She smiled and hugged Waylon. I'm so good to have you as my husband. At Coralia, in Hometown, Yale told Ursule to bring Zephyr for a walk at the market. It was the market day in Hometown, so the market would be livelier today. Many visitors were everywhere in the streets as they made their way through the ancient and noisy town. Ursule turned her head around and asked, Sir, have you ever been to the market in this town? Not yet, replied Zephyr. I knew it. After all, you've been staying in your room the whole time. You should come out often and enjoy the atmosphere in our town, she said with a smile. Suddenly, Zephyr looked at her. Hey, before Ursule could say anything, someone rammed into her and knocked her phone out of her hand. The person did not apologize to her and continued to walk forward with his head held low in dejection. Zephyr helped her to pick up her phone and handed it to her. She took over her phone, and when she saw that there were cracks on her phone, she shouted at the man, Hey! Watch where you are going. She realized something as soon as she finished shouting and observed the man. He was walking with that weird gait, and she felt something was off. Sir, he looks a bit strange, don't you think? Zephyr turned his head around and frowned slightly. It's none of our business. We should. Before he could finish his sentence, Ursule followed after the man. Hey, Ursule, come back here! Shouted Zephyr, but Ursule paid him no mind. He placed his hand on his nose and sighed. He did not know why Ursule had to poke her nose into other people's affairs. Ursule followed the man to the lake. When she saw that he climbed over the fence without any hesitation, she ran over and shouted, Hey, what are you? The man jumped into the lake. Ursule ran over to the fence and shouted at the top of her lungs, hoping to let other people know someone had jumped into the lake. Suddenly, Zephyr handed his phone to her and climbed over the fence. He jumped into the lake and grabbed the man up. Chapter 2750. More and more people started to gather around the fence. Some of them called the police, while others stood forward to help them. Ursule hastily went over to Zephyr. Zephyr was performing CPR on the man, and he slowly came around to his senses after spurting out a mouthful of water. Ursule let out a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the scene as well. After they asked the people around for the whole story, they walked up to Zephyr and said, "Hi, sir, can you come back with us to the police station? We need to take your statement." Zephyr nodded. At the police station, Ursule was waiting for Zephyr in the corridor. When Zephyr came out after giving his statement, she walked up to him. "Are you all right? Let's go back and get your clothes changed." "Okay," replied Zephyr. After they returned to the homestay, Ursule told Yale that a man had tried to kill himself by jumping into the lake and that Zephyr had saved him. After listening to the story, Yale asked, why did he want to kill himself? "Who knows? Maybe he came across some terrible things and lost all his hope to stay alive," said Ursule. Yale put the coffee beans into the grinder and said, "But you're quite observant. How did you know that he was going to kill himself?" Ursule sat beside the bar and said, "He was walking wobbly. I was worried that he might be drunk or something, and he might be killed if he ran into a car on the road." Little did she expect that he was going to kill himself anyway. The man was only a young man in his 20s. Zephyr came downstairs after taking a bath and changing his clothes. Yale turned his head around and said, well, it seems like our hero of the day is here. What do you think after saving a life, Mr. Gosling? Do you have anything to share with us?" He walked over to the couch and sat down. "I just don't want a dead person to ruin this place." Holding a cup of coffee in his hand, Yale walked over to the couch and handed the coffee to him. "Here, this is for you to warm yourself up." Ursule came over as well and said, "But it's all thanks to your swift action. If you were a bit slower, he might be really dead." Yale raised his head and looked at her. "He must be very lucky to have run into you two. If he has the courage to kill himself, why doesn't he have the courage to continue living?" asked Ursule. "Just like you said, maybe he encountered something terrible that caused him to lose his will to live," Yale said in a serious voice. Ursule placed her hands under her head and lamented. "Being adults sure is tough. All adults have their own problems and worries in their lives. It just depends on how we're going to deal with them." After Yale finished talking, he looked at Zephyr, who was taking a sip from the coffee, and asked, "What about you, Mr. Gosling? After staying here for so long, have you finally found a way to solve your problem?" Zephyr lowered his head and looked at the coffee. "I'm going back in a few days. I'll take it as a yes then." Yale smiled. "Yeah," he replied. "That's great to hear. You've been in this town for a very long time. I'm sure your parents are worried about you. After all, you're their only son," said Yale. Ursule lowered her head. No one knew what she was thinking about. At night, Ursule came to Zephyr's room with kisses in her arms. She knocked on the door, and it took Zephyr a few minutes before he opened the door. He stood in front of her in his sleeping suit and asked, "Yeah. It seems to me that you like kisses very much. Aren't you going back already? So I think I should let Kisses keep you company for a while." She handed Kisses to Zephyr. Kisses looked at Zephyr and meowed at him sweetly. Zephyr held Kisses in his arms and asked, "Will it remember me?" "Of course. It has already gotten used to your scent, so it'll remember you," Ursule replied with a smile. While Zephyr stroked its fluffy fur, Ursule looked at him for a while and asked, "Sir, will you still come back here after you return?"